All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome on this beautiful spring. It's not spring yet officially, right? On this beautiful morning on the eve of Purim, as we get started for another beautiful lesson. We have powerful lesson about Teshuva. It's getting a little more into the nitty-gritty of the process of Teshuva based on the Alter Rebbe's teachings. So we'll do a little bit of a summary, but we'll start with a joke of the person sitting and he's drinking in a bar, and in walks a nun, and she's rebuking him. She's trying to convince him to stop drinking. She says it's bad for you, it makes you tipsy, and it makes you do things that you don't want to do, and it's not good for your liver. And she's going on and on about not drinking. So he asked the nun, "Did you ever have a drink?" She said no. So he was like, "How would you know what it makes you feel like if you never even had a drink?" So she's like, "Everyone will know I can't have a drink." He's like, "Come on, you just have a drink. Everyone, no one will know. I won't tell anyone." They're like, "Everyone will see me holding a cup." So he's like, "I'll put it in a teacup, and no one will know that it's a drink." So she says, "Okay." So he orders a drink in a teacup, and the bartender is like, "Is that for the nun again?" So we're talking about teshuva, about getting over our mistakes, getting over our flaws that we may have inside of us that comes out on the surface, and we acted in a way that we're not. So the goal is teshuva means to move forward, and by moving forward, that's how you're fixing your ways, teshuva. But what we've been addressing, and it's something we've actually been, belaboring a little bit. The Alter Rebbe is kind of veering off on the concept of fasting, because the reason why we have to talk about it is because in so much literature of sages going back 1,000 years, and even all the way from the times of the prophets, they talk about fasting as a way of coming back from your evil ways. So how does it fit in? The Alter Rebbe has to explain, how does fasting fit into Teshuvah? So in chapter one, we kind of went back and forth, chapter one versus chapter two. In chapter one, we said that fasting is out of the question. You don't see it in Jewish law. You may see it in other literature, but if you want to know the facts, you have to go to Jewish law. And in Jewish law, it says that teshuva has no relation to fasting. Look at the Rambam. It doesn't talk about teshuva when it comes to fasting. So the end of chapter one, he says, where would fasting come in? It's not even really related to teshuva. It's related about averting an evil decree. If you see in the literature of the prophets or anywhere else, the idea of fasting, it's about um, um, avoiding an evil decree, or if there's a drought in Israel, or if it's a personal a reach that you want to try to have.
We had to go faster.
Exactly. So, well, I will say, and I'll say it a few times, that I'm sure it'll come up again, that there are fasts that are mandated in the Torah. Yom Kippur is the big one. That's not what we're talking about. When we say that fasting is no longer in this generation, it's not talking about the fasts that are in the Torah. So the big one is Yom Kippur. That's actually the biblical mitzvah to fast on Yom Kippur. And then we have the ordained fasts. The other big one is going to be Tisha B'av in the summer, and then we have one coming up tomorrow, which is the fast of Esther. And what Shira, I think, is pointing out, which is very, very true, that when Esther was about to go into the king's palace, which she wasn't called for, and therefore was very, very dangerous, that would mean death. She had everyone of the Jewish community fast for 3 days before she went in, and she herself fasted, which is an incredible idea. And then she went in. So again, I think what Shira is trying to point out is the fast that they did back then was also to avert an evil decree that was coming upon the Jewish people. Nowadays, we actually have the fast of Esther, which this year, because Purim is on Sunday, which means the fast of Esther would technically be on Shabbos. We don't fast on Shabbos unless it's Yom Kippur, and therefore the fast is brought earlier to tomorrow. But we'll keep that on the side for now. So in chapter two, we continued by saying that even though chapter one is saying that fast is not really related to teshuva, chapter two said fasting is the next step beyond teshuva. So it's not part of teshuva; it's kind of a reset. It's teshuva is to repair the relationship. Fasting would be to reset the relationship, which means to make as if the mistake never happened, to get close and to get into our good grace the way we were before the sin, that's where fasting would have a truth, have a place. Is the example we gave last week was about a minister who did something wrong to the king. So technically, that would mean you're out. You don't get second chances. So he hires someone, an advocate, to come up on his behalf, and the king forgives him, but he still wants nothing to do with him. So the idea of a fast is similar to a gift that the minister would bring to the king to appease him and to totally wipe his slate clean. So it's like a reset. That's where fasting would come in. So it's not teshuva, but it's the next step beyond teshuva. It's even beyond atonement, where you want to be, you're giving a gift that's not even called for. So we said it's similar to in times of the temple when someone would fail to do a positive commandment, they would bring a voluntary offering, which is what we're learning about actually in this week's Torah portion. All the offerings, while there were many offerings in the temple, in the first offering that we talk about is actually a voluntary offering. It's called a karban ola, which means the all-consuming or the all-burnt offering. And that was a voluntary offering that was brought in the temple. So when a person would fail to do a positive mitzvah, how would they make up for it? They can't do the mitzvah again. I mean, they could, but it's not going to make up for the kiddush they were supposed to do last Friday night. You could do kiddush this Friday night. You could put on tefillin tomorrow, but it won't help you for the tefillin from yesterday. So they would bring a voluntary offering. So nowadays that we don't have a temple, in the place of a voluntary offering, we have fasting. So fasting takes the place as a gift to God beyond teshuvah. So now in chapter 3, there's another angle or two angles of fasting and how it applies now. And it goes like this. The question is, if a person sinned, well, we ended off in chapter 2, we said that the Arizal, who was Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was the master of the Lurianic Kabbalah, and for several of us, Shishira, this is the 1 year anniversary since we were in Israel together. And Naomi, do you remember last year, mid-March, we just started our trip to Israel, which was amazing. So we went to a place called Tzfat on the first day of our trip. And in Tzfat is the place where the Arizal lived. If I'm not mistaken, we went to his synagogue, yes, which was incredible. With my father-in-law on the side, I actually went to the Arizal's mikvah, just freezing cold, like freezing. It's like the mountain. It's like a spring water from a mountain. Um, and but it says that if a person immerses in this mikvah, they won't die before doing teshuva, which is an amazing thing. It's the place where the Arizal would use the mikvah on Fridays, Erev Shabbat. So the Arizal taught his students, which were obviously very, very advanced, he taught them that for every sin, there are a certain prescribed number of fasts that we should do. Um, so that's as Steve is bringing up. I just want to answer, Steve, what you're saying. It's a very good question. Fasting clears the mind. Therefore, your question is, let me just get back to the question, is fasting related to intensifying kavana? So we're going to get to that, Steve, before the end of today. I want to make sure we address that. The difference between the olden days and now. I want to make sure we address that, but it's a very good question. So anyway, the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, he taught his students that if a person, for example, got angry, they would fast 151 fasts, which is pretty crazy. If a person neglected prayer, they would fast, if I'm not mistaken, it was 53. If a person, so there was a certain number of fasts for each thing, and the Rebbe's father explained, and we had it in the translation last week, why that number. So the Hebrew name kas, which means anger, is the numerical value of 151. So that's why they would fast 151. So the question is, what if a person got angry twice, yesterday and today? Does he have to fast 151 times 2? And if he neglected prayer for 5 days, does he have to fast 53 times 50 or whatever amount of times? He'll be fasting his whole life. How does that work? So there was two different methods amongst the sages of how they should deal with that. It depends which type of offering you're comparing it to in the temple. One is if you compare it in the times of the temple, depending on a person's sin, they would bring an offering. One opinion is fasting should be considered like a sin offering. Now, a sin offering, if a person neglected Shabbat, unintentionally, which means they didn't know of Shabbat and they didn't know of the next. They didn't know this is forbidden to do on Shabbat. So they did you bring what's called the carbon chatas, a sin offering. They did things that they didn't know, or they didn't know they were eating non-kosher. They didn't know they weren't allowed to eat non-kosher, whatever it is. So they would bring a sin offering for each violation. So if they desecrated Shabbat 10 times, and then they realized that they were desecrating Shabbat, they would have to bring 10 sin offerings. So one for each transgression, one for each violation. So therefore, according to that, the fasting that we do is compared to a sin offering, and therefore every anger you have to fast 151. So if you get angry a whole month, 30 days, you're fasting whatever 151 times 30 is. I don't know. Um, but other sages say it's compared to the Ola offering, which is another offering in the temple. And the Ola offering, you only bring one for the amount of violations. So, which means you could do it 50 times, but you'll only bring one offering. So, one opinion amongst the sages is fasting you do for each violation. And another opinion is any violation on the same category, you just bring one fast or one segment of fasts, whether it's the 53 or the 151 or whatever it is, um, one time, and that cancels or that cleans all the violations of that category. So that's the two opinions. So the Alter Rebbe says that amongst the sages, they made a compromise between doing each one or doing it once for all of them. That you do it 3 times and that suffices. So if a person got angry 100,000 times, you do 3 sets of the 151 fasts. And again, I know Javi, you're going to leave soon, but that's where we are in the chapter now. We didn't finish a chapter, but I'm going to try to make it quick over here. And the reason is because sin desensitizes a person. The first time it makes a stain. The second time it starts seeping through the garment. The third time it's being able to be seen on the other side. So a sin stains the person. And the more a person sins, the more it desensitizes the person's character, the person's morals. So the tipping point is 3 times. When a person does a sin 3 times, that's when a person is desensitized to it. So therefore, we should do a set of fasts, 3 sets of fasts, in order to clean out that desensitization. I don't even know if that's a word. Is desensitization a word? Desensitize? Maybe. Okay, Naomi's an author and she's saying it's a word. All right, we'll go with that. Okay. So what I just concluded is that whatever sin a person did, no matter the amount of times you did it, when you're ready to do teshuva, you do your teshuva, which means you commit to not do it again. You own up to it. And then when you're ready to bring a gift to God, which is to clean your slate and to make a reset, and you want to fast, you do 3 sets of that fasting recipe. But there's a lot of conditions. And here's the fine print, the Alter Rebbe says in the chapter. Number one, you have to be very fit. You have to be incredibly healthy to be able to manage these fasts. You have to be able to bear the pain. If you can't sustain it and you're still fasting, not only are you not doing a good thing, the Torah would actually call you a sinner for fasting when you're unable to. So again, of course, Yom Kippur, you're supposed to fast and you have to speak to your local rabbi, you have to speak to a doctor, but we're talking about a voluntary fast to be on a reset. And for that, if you're not really strong enough to do it and you're doing it, you're actually not doing a good thing. You're actually doing what's called a sin. So most of us are not on that level to be able to fast these amount of times and to be able to sustain it, to be able to be able to enhance our service. So therefore, and Steve, that's getting now to your question of does it enhance our kavanah? I just want to bring your question back up because it's a very important one. So you're right. So fasting clears the mind. Um, but your question is, does it intensify our kavanah? I would tend to say no, because maybe everyone fasts differently. Maybe for a few hours it can, but after that you're just thinking of food. Um, we have we're meeting with a caterer. We have, thank God, after Pesach, we have Yassi's bar mitzvah, my son's bar mitzvah coming up, and we're meeting with a caterer, and they wanted to know if they could come by tomorrow to meet. And I told him tomorrow's a fast day. I'm going to want everything on the menu because I'm going to be so hungry. Whatever you're going to show me, I'm going to say, yes, add that to the menu, add that to the menu. It's going to be too expensive by the time I'm finished. So they're actually coming tonight instead of tomorrow because all I could think about when I'm fasting is caffeine and food. So
Have you ever
um,
fasted? Have you ever fasted for more than a day? Because after like 2 days, you kind of lose the desire for food. And I wonder if any of the righteous people that fasted felt that it weakened them, or that
wow.
it didn't it
You,
always strengthen them. I mean,
so if, go ahead.
they fasted because they didn't need food.
Right.
They didn't
But
need the
if I
food. They were living on hormones more, and food is
yeah.
kind of weighs you down
Would you
when
say
you.
that even now there's a tipping point that the first 24 hours you're hungry, but after that you kind of don't think of food anymore? You're kind of in a different zone?
Well, there is a point that that definitely happens. And let me bring something else up. Does Judaism have any kind of what we call astringencies? The example that I have is, I met a holy man in India, and I brought him to America for 6 months, and he stood for the last week before he went back to India. He stood constantly 24 hours till his feet swelled, and he took razors to him and sliced the sides of them. But he took it on as an austerity, like a fast, and I talked to him a little about it, why, but I didn't know if Judaism had a notion of it about it. It separates everything else you're thinking about, and all you're
Mhm.
thinking about is the divine.
So that's really cool. And so first of all, the idea of cutting whatever, that's for sure banned within Judaism. But the fasting in the olden days, it was a way for people to pain themselves within the context of Judaism. And the Alter Rebbe, I think this is a revolutionary idea of Teshuva from the Hasidic standpoint, is that the Alter Rebbe says we don't do that, and therefore the next part. So, Steve, to answer your question about the kavana, it could intensify kavana, like you're saying, like the holy Jews from the olden days. But in our generations, and this is the Alter Rebbe speaking in 1805 when he wrote this part of the Tanya, is that we don't do it anymore. And therefore, in chapter 3, the Alter Rebbe says what we should do is substitute it with charity. The Alter Rebbe even gives the currency of the Polish coins, which I guess was the currency that was used at the time. We're going to see when we learn the Tanya in the chapter inside, we'll see the actual currency. But it's 18 Polish coins a day. That is, so for example, if a person has to fast 100 times because of um, Um, so let's say um, what's a rounded number? Let's say he has to fast. Let's say 30 fasts, which means he sinned something that he would usually have to fast 10 times to give a gift to God. So now he's doing it 3 sets. So he's fasting 30. So if you take $18 per day or per day of fasting and you times that by 30, it's 30 times 18, anyone? No,
It's a lot. It's a lot.
it's actually not that much, is it? 30 times 18. To be a gift to God,
$4.60.
$540
Yeah.
feels good. Okay. It's cheap.
Let me
Uh,
ask you this: what do you call some of the rabbanim who hardly ate all week? They only ate, a little before Shabbos, but they barely ate all week. That's not called fasting, is it?
hold on, Steve. We're gonna get there. Very good. This is all in chapter 3. You're
I'm
right on
sorry.
it. Okay.
I
No, I
apologize.
love it. I love it. No, don't apologize. This is exactly I want to get to there. Exactly. I want to talk about like different suggestions Alter Rebbe gives and how we see the Rebbe did it. But if we should do it, all of this is good. So, but now the Alter Rebbe says, wait a minute. There's a rule about charity that a person, even when they want to give charity, the average is to give 10% of your earnings to charity. It's called Meiser. If you're feeling very generous, you give Homish. Homish is giving 20%. Right now, we just made a commitment for to help the Jewish people and to help Israel. We wanted to give 20%. So that's a lot. Now, so if you make $1,000, you're giving $200 away. If you make $100,000, you're giving $20,000 away. Um, So how could you give that much charity? Let's say a person got angry 50 times, so they have to do three sets of 151. I mean, I don't know what the exact math is, but even just 100 fasts, and you're giving $18 a day, that's $1,800. So 151 fasts times 1,800 times three, whatever it is, it adds up. So you're not allowed to give more. You're not allowed to give all your money. So the Alter Rebbe says just it's like one of the most famous parts of chapter 3, and I want to make sure I explain it. Is the Alter Rebbe says that's on the normal. You can't give more than 20%. But it's no different than your physical health. If a person has, God forbid, an illness that they need a cure, you would spend all the money in the world because your life depends on it. You won't say, "Oh, I could only spend 20% to remove, God forbid, a terrible illness within me." No, you would spend whatever you can to get better. So when it comes to your spiritual health, also, you shouldn't limit the amount you're giving of charity in order to help your spiritual health. So you're right. Usually there's a rule of 20%, and that's true. But when it comes to the idea of substituting for fasting, we you don't have a limit of that 20%. I found that incredible of an idea. Um, and well, I'll explain, I want to explain a little more of that. I guess I'll explain it now. The Alter Rebbe himself didn't just preach this, he practiced this. The idea of giving an enormous amount of charity, we see by all the Rebbes, and it was a constant thing, not only by Rebbes, they trained us that we're not so beholden to our money. We don't even look at our money as ours. Like we would just give. And our Rebbe on Sunday, he gave around $6,000 bills on a Sunday morning to myself. I know Naomi went for a Sunday morning dollars, um, and you receive $1 from the Rebbe. It's an incredible idea, but just imagine the amount of dollars the Rebbe was just giving. And the Alter Rebbe, at the time when he got married, he was young. He was a young teenager, but he was considered the prodigy of the generation. And the way it used to work in those days is the greater the Torah scholar, the more dowry they would be able to get from a prospective bride's parents to support the young prodigy, the scholar, to pursue his studies. So the Alter Rebbe, as a young teenager, when he was marrying, again, it was a different generation, but he was a giant of Torah, meaning people respect. He studied the entire Talmud, and he was giving classes on the Talmud by the age of 10. He was also a genius on math and on geometry. He helped the prince or the duke understand the sundial, why the sun is not shining and the time is not right on the sundial, from understanding what's going on 80 kilometers away. There's all these incredible stories. He did that as an 11-year-old, so it's a different generation. But he was able to demand a high dowry from both his brides, his in-laws, and also his parents gave a lot of money to him to support him. And he made a condition that whatever you give me, it's my money, and I get to choose what I want to do with it. And his parents, his in-laws, they all agreed to it. So when he got married, he got the dowry. It was a huge amount of money. I don't know what it was, but it was a huge amount, like $1 million. And he took the entire sum and he donated it to charity. He gave it to poor people, the entire sum, and he lived in poverty. So the idea of charity by the Alter Rebbe was huge. So the Alter Rebbe says over here, if your life depends on it, you don't limit to 20%, just like physical health. So the Alter Rebbe says you should, if you have three sets of fast that you have to do, you should try to do one of the three. So let's say it's 30 fast that you have to do, or let's say it's 100 fast that you have to do. And this, Steve, this is getting back to what you're saying. You should pick days that are shorter, which are the winter days before we change the clock, when it gets light at 7:30 or 7 o'clock, and it gets dark already by sundown is by 4:45 or 5 o'clock. Choose those days to fast, which are shorter days, so it's much more manageable. And choose only the shortest days of that winter, and do it over a few winters. So maybe choose 10 fasts a year, and do it not every day, but do it, let's say, twice a month, and do it for a few months, and then do it the next year, a few months, and over 10 years, you accumulate 30 fasts or 50 fasts or 100 fasts. So one of the three sets of fasts you should try to do. The next two, he says, using other sources from the Jerusalem Talmud and elsewhere, we're going to see it inside, that half a day is considered like a full day, according to some opinions. So therefore, use those winter days and only fast half a day to make up for the other two sets of fasting. And so, Steve, does that answer your question a little bit? That half a day could be considered a full day. And again, if the day starts at 7 o'clock is sunrise, and midday is already by 12:15, it's just missing a breakfast.
Oh,
Um,
I think we all fast then between breakfast and lunch and dinner then, in a
so as
sense.
long as so it has to start from the beginning of the day. So that's a good question. Would it count, let's say, between lunch and dinner? That's not considered a fast. It has to do from when the sun rises. That's when the fast starts. Um, so no difference, Adrian. What do you mean by no difference? Um, oh, you're muted. Sorry, say again.
I said that to Naomi,
Oh,
but
got it.
yeah.
Um, okay, got it. Um, so wait, so Steve, say again.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I said.
Oh no, so it has to be from
2
sunrise to
2 hours.
yeah,
Can you have intermittent fasting? Is it considered fasting if you don't eat for a
no,
couple hours and you feel
right.
hunger pain and are irritable and all the
No,
all the qualities that you have? And
right. So I think it's only from the beginning of the day. It doesn't count, I had a coffee and now I'm ready to fast. So a person could wake up, make their breakfast at 5:30 before it gets light outside. And then from when it's light, they don't eat until lunch. That's considered a fast, even though they're full. But it's the fasting is from sunrise.
is
And
there
here's oh yeah, go ahead.
is there a Kabbalistic significance to the word fast? Like, are we trying to get it over with fast? I mean, why
Oh,
do we
interesting.
why
Kindness.
do we
Yeah, I
call
have
it a
no
fast?
idea. I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay.
Why are we fasting? I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. Never thought of that, but it's really it's a good question. So the Alter Rebbe says a fascinating term here in chapter 3. Has anyone heard of the term Haredi? Haredi, it means it literally would mean meticulous. In Israel, the politics between the religious and the secular, in Hebrew, the religious are called the Haredi, but literally it means the meticulous. So the Alter Rebbe says the Haredi, which means the people that are caring and meticulous and passionate about their Judaism, they're always giving charity. And there's no question, the Alter Rebbe, we'll see in the next book of the Tanya, which is the Alter Rebbe's letters. Most of the letters is the Alter Rebbe encouraging the Jewish communities to give more charity. And like I said, the Alter Rebbe practiced this. Um, just another thing I want to say over here. The Rebbe explains that it may seem in chapter 3 that we're almost like second class. We're not strong enough now. In the olden days, they were able to fast. We can't handle the fasts, and therefore we either try to do a few that are short and mainly substitute it with charity. That's really what our generation is like. So our Rebbe says, don't think that we're second class. That really we should be fasting. We're just not strong enough, and therefore we give charity. Our Rebbe says that it can't be because Hashem creates the world every second, and therefore Hashem intended for us to do what we need to do for our generation. So it's not like ideally we should be fasting, but since we can't, we're giving charity. The Rebbe says no. If ideally we should be fasting, Hashem would have made us strong enough to fast. It's that nowadays fasting is not our method of connecting to God the way it was in the olden days. So we really can't relate to it. But in the olden days, similar to what Steve is saying, by the holy people, they were stronger, and therefore, when they would fast, their kavana would be intensified. Their connection to God would be stronger and deeper. We don't really have that, most of us, um, and therefore, it's not a sad thing that we can't fast. It's that it's not meant for our generation. It's similar to some of you are familiar with this, and we know that on Rosh Hashanah there's a mitzvah to hear the shofar. This past year, the first day of Rosh Hashanah was on a Shabbat, similar to the Rosh Hashanah during COVID in 2020. It was also on Shabbat, and therefore we don't blow the shofar. The simple reason given in the Talmud is why don't we blow the shofar when Shabbat is Rosh Hashanah? Because we're worried that maybe an ignorant person may carry the shofar to learn how to blow it or to ask a question, and we're not allowed to carry on Shabbat, and therefore it was banned for everyone to blow the shofar, which seems like such a side reason because of the ignorant person that's going to carry a shofar. Why is he? He shouldn't even be carrying a shofar to begin with. But so the Rebbe explains that it's more. It's that on Rosh Hashanah, we need to blow the shofar, but when it's on Shabbat, Shabbat accomplishes what the shofar goes to do. So it reaches the level of the shofar blast without even blowing the shofar, just from Shabbat. So therefore, we don't need that type. So it's not a second class by not blowing the shofar. It's because Shabbat accomplishes it. So in our generation, charity accomplishes what fasting set out to accomplish. So in the olden days, they did it more through fasting. Nowadays, we do it through charity. So we don't need the fasting. And like I said last week, in 1988, the Rebbe basically outlawed fasting, except for the ones that are obligation, which is, like we said, the fast of the year. Now, someone even came once to the Rebbe, and this was in the 60s, and he looked like so weak and pale and skinny and scrawny, and the Rebbe says, "You look like a person." What was the word he said? You look like a person that lived before this book of the Tanya was published. Which means when this book of the Tanya was published, the Alter Rebbe already said, our generation is not meant for fasting, and therefore we substitute it with charity. And it looks like you're fasting so much that you didn't study the book, because if you study the book, you'll see how, what the proper way for our generation is. Okay, so just a final thing before we end is there was a general view in Torah, in Jewish literature and Jewish study, was that you either strengthen the body and that weakens the soul, or you strengthen the soul and that weakens the body, which means one is going to be stronger, one is going to be weaker. If a person is taking care of their physical health, which means they're working out, they're watching what they eat, they're all into themselves, and therefore it weakens the soul. The soul doesn't feel that good. Again, I'm not saying that's now, but I'm saying that was a general view within Judaism. That was more the Kabbalah style, that you focus more on your soul and your body takes the brunt. The Rambam, Maimonides, which is more Jewish law, not the Kabbalah, it's more the law, the Rambam speaks extensively about taking care of your body. And he says that it's part of the service of your soul and that it's needed for your soul. Even the Rambam in Jewish law talks about getting 8 hours of sleep a night, which is fascinating. Yeah.
I like what what Kabbalah says, take care of your body so your soul can flourish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is that usually Hasidus usually takes on, or the Baal Shem Tov, I would say, would usually take on the opinion of Kabbalah. Whenever there's, a discrepancy between Kabbalah and Rambam, a lot of times we would tend to more the soulful, the Kabbalistic, mystical dimension. But over here, the Baal Shem Tov strongly chose the side of the Rambam, which is to take care of your body. And at the time, there were a lot of people that didn't understand it. It's just very interesting. His successor, the Baal Shem Tov's successor, he was known as the Maggid, the preacher of Mezrich. His name was Rabbi Dovber, and he was the Rebbe of the Alter Rebbe. So a lot of the teachings that we're learning is the Alter Rebbe teaching what he learned from his master, from the Baal Shem Tov successor. So his name was the Maggid. He was known as the Maggid, and he had a son that was known as a Malach. He was nicknamed the Malach. His name was Avraham, and he was known as Avram the Angel, Avram the Malach. He was called that because he didn't focus on his body at all. He was fully like an angel. An angel doesn't need to eat. And we know that from a story of the Torah where there's 3 angels that came to Avram and they made as if they were eating because they wanted to honor Avram, but they didn't really eat. So he was so holy, this Avraham, and he wouldn't eat much. There was a lot of really cool stories about him where when the Alter Rebbe, who wanted to learn Hasidus, he was drawn by it, so he came to study by the Maggid. This was in Ukraine, in the town of Mezrich. The Maggid appointed his son to study with the Alter Rebbe, and they would be study partners. For the Talmudic discussion, the Alter Rebbe would teach Avraham For the Kabbalistic discussion, Avram would teach the Alter Rebbe, because he was stronger on the mystical dimension and the Alter Rebbe was stronger on the Talmudic dimension. So they would teach each other. But the story is that the Alter Rebbe, he would take the clock and he would turn it back to make his time learning the Kabbalistic, to be taught the Kabbalistic dimension from Avram. It would be longer because he would turn the clock back. And Avram was so engrossed in the study and the teachings, he didn't even realize that the time was brought back, and therefore they would study many, many more hours in the Kabbalistic dimension, because the Alter Rebbe wanted to learn that a lot more than he wanted to teach the Talmudic dimension. But Rabbi Avram was so oblivious to it because he was like a malach. So before his father died, he called in his son. It was on his deathbed. And he says, my will is that you take care of your body. I plead of you. He was dying. And he said, I beg of you, take care of your body. And he said the famous line, and this became a very famous line in Hasidic circles. He said in Yiddish, and I want to share it in Yiddish, but it's a very it's a very important when he says Allah, a kleiner Allah in guf is a greater Allah in their neshama. A small hole in the body, it leads to a big hole in the soul. So meaning you got to take care of yourself because it's good for your soul also. And then his father died, and Avram didn't listen. He still was just involved in his soul and didn't take care of his body. He died very young, by the way. And what he said is, "How I have to listen to my father, the flesh, but then I have to listen to my Father of heaven. Which one is more important? Father of heaven, he was referring to God, and that he felt from his standpoint, from the Kabbalistic dimension, you just focus on your soul, which is so. But the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and the Hasidic and the Chabad approach is from like the Rambam, which is you focus more on your not more you focusing on your physical health, whether it means gym and exercise and diet and stretches and walks and taking care of yourself is important for your soul also.
That's why the Rebbe would say you can eat before you pray, right?
Exactly. And therefore, the Chabad way in Jewish law, it says that you shouldn't taste any food before praying in the morning because praying is a priority. The Chabad approach is that you should eat something, not a big meal, don't have bread, but you should be able to have a food first so that you're praying with more kavana you're not running you're running through your prayer in order to get to breakfast. So we're focusing on the body in order to enhance the connection of the soul. So the reason why I'm bringing this all in is to explain to us that the same is also with fasting, that we have to take care of ourselves. And if we focus on our fasts, we're not actually doing a service because we're not in our generation, we're not able to properly be in service when we're weak from fasts, and therefore we substitute it with charity. Anything else? Okay, I think that's all my notes. Any questions? See if we could already start a little bit inside. Okay, let's.
So, there are people who normally haven't fasted for the fast of Esther, and there's a big call this year for people to fast.
Oh, really?
Thinking about the kidnap, the hostages, right?
Yeah.
To actually fast for them.
Okay.
So the evil decree of and war and all that.
Beautiful. I
Yeah.
didn't even hear that. Wow. Okay, let's stop over here. A little bit early, but I feel like it's a chapter that I'd rather, if we dig in, to go all the way. I guess, do you guys mind if we read just a little bit? Let's read a little bit. Is my screen shared yet? Let's just dig in. Okay, let's just at least start a little bit. Section 1 of chapter 3. Hope you guys could see it on the screen. Cheryl, what page are we inside?
I have 42.
Perfect. Is that chapter 3?
Yeah. Section 3. Actually, chapter 2.
I think we finished chapter 2 last week. So.
I did chapter 3.
Yeah, perfect. Let's do chapter 3.
Okay. So page 45.
45, perfect. Section 1, 3 views of fast calculations. This is what I shared a little bit earlier outside, but let's see it inside. In chapter 2, we learned that while fasting is not an intrinsic part of the tshuva process, it can act as a substitute for the burnt offering brought in temple times. This was a post-atonement gift to God in order that you should be desirable to God as pleasing and cherished to him as you were before the sin, bringing satisfaction to your maker through worshiping him. So that was, in addition to the teshuva, we have a gift which was like to reset. We also learned that Arizal offered a series of guidelines as to how to carry out these fasts practically, identifying the number of fasts that are advisable for various different sins. In this chapter, the Tanya will clarify a doubt regarding the recommendations of Arizal. How do we go about it if you do multiple of the same sins and violations? Now, the later scholars of Musar were divided over the question of a person who transgressed the same sin several times. In such a case, is the number of fasts recommended by Arizal sufficient for multiple violations of the same sin or not? So let's say it's anger and it's 151 fasts. Do you do just one set of 151, or do you have to do a separate one for each one? Some scholars were of the more stringent opinion that you must carry out the number of fasts recommended for that sin multiplied by the number of times you committed it. The Tanya illustrates this view with an example. For example, take the sin of emitting seed in vain, which in Arizal's guidelines for repentance requires 84 fasts. If a person would commit this sin 10 or 20 times, for example, then according to the more stringent opinion of the later Musar scholars, that would have to carry out 10 or 20 times 84 fasts, a total of 840 or 1,680, 1,680 fasts, respectively. And so too with all subsequent violations. The Tanya provides a source supportive of this stringent view. In this stringent view, the fasting is comparable to the law of a sin offering, which would be offered for every single transgression. Other scholars of Musar were more lenient and compared multiple transgressions of the same sin to the burnt offering, brought for failing to carry out a positive command, where the law states that even the repeated neglect of a positive command is atoned with just one burnt offering, as the Talmud teaches in the first chapter of Zvach. According to this lenient view, the person need only carry out 84 fasts for any number of violations of emitting seed in vain. What is the rationale underlying the lenient and stringent views? So how do we go about, what's the rationale? So the 613 commandments each correspond to different parts of the body as well as a portion of the soul, which energizes that body part. The lenient view's concern is, how do we spiritually heal that particular body part and its portion of the soul once the sin has occurred? This helps us understand why the lenient view only requires one round of fast, even for multiple violations of the same sin. After one violation, the associated body part becomes completely contaminated. Further violations do not further significant spiritual harm. One round of fasting is therefore sufficient to atone for multiple violations because, in essence, we only really need to heal the first infraction. The stringent view has a different concern. While a sin's strongest effects are upon one particular body part, nevertheless, there is also a seepage of contamination into the rest of the body and soul. This has no limit. Every time you repeat that sin, further seepage occurs. Therefore, the stringent view requires a round of fasting for every violation, so to spiritually heal the further seepage caused on each occasion. So that's from the Rebbe. The Tanya now cites an intermediate position. So I'm going a little fast because I explained this a little bit outside, but this is going to be the compromise. One opinion is you do one for each set for each violation. One is you do one for all of them. The compromise is you do it 3 times. Between the stringent and lenient views is as follows. The consensus which has been accepted and transmitted to us by our teachers is somewhere between the 2 positions, namely to fast 3 times the number of fasts required for a particular sin, even if many more than 3 violations occur. For example, in the above case of emitting seed in vain, this would total 3 times 84, which equals 252 fasts for any number of violations, and the calculation would be the same for other sins and violations. The Tanya explains the logic behind the intermediate position. The reason for the multiple of 3 here is based on a statement of the Holy Zohar and the Parashas Noach. When a person sins before the Blessed Holy One once, it makes an impression. On the 3rd occasion, that's when it's a stain. The stain spreads from one side to the other, meaning it seeps through and it gets to the other side of the garment. On this basis, the number of fasts recommended by the intermediate position is 3 times. The first 3 violations of a sin are particularly damaging as they cause negative energy to spread from one side to the other of the particular body part and its soul energy associated with that sin. Above, we explained in our discussion of the lenient view that a body part and its soul energy becomes completely contaminated upon the first violation of the sin associated with it. Or that's the first one. How are we to understand the Tanya's teaching here? The 3 violations are required. Every body part has its own independent identity, but it also part of the bigger system of the body as a whole. Any system is built on interconnectedness. Each part of a system is connected with, and each part of the system is connected with and contains all the other body parts. Hold on. Okay. The lenient view's concern was the body part's independent identity. That indeed becomes completely contaminated upon the first violation of the sin associated with it. The intermediate position is concerned also with the body part's systemic identity. How all the other parts of the body system are included within this particular body part. It is about this issue of systemic identity that the Zohar taught on the third occasion. The stain spreads from one side to the other. While it takes only one violation to contaminate a body's parts independent identity, it takes 3 violations to fully contaminate the systemic identity, to the extent that all the other body parts contained within it also become affected. This is why the intermediate position requires 3 rounds of fasting to detoxify the systemic contamination that was completed through 3 violations. So this last part is a teaching from the Rebbe, just explaining why we have we've fasted 3 rounds, and I think we'll end with that as we get into section 2. Okay, let's stop over there, everyone.
We have a question.
Yeah, let's take questions.
So it seems like this no longer applies to us, the 3 fasts, because
Right.
our bodies aren't what they used to be, or we can't take it.
Exactly, and we
So-
substituted with charity.
So I'm trying to understand, why am I learning this? How is this applying to my life?
Oh.
If it's basically irrelevant now, that's the
That's a
question.
very good question. Very good question. I need to think about that. I think as we go further, meaning the next part of the chapter is talking about the charity that we do
Yes. Yeah.
as a substitute, and the idea of learning just the importance of giving that charity and realizing that it's actually a reset for us, and the constant giving mentality is actually there to help us and to help our neshama reach a higher place in our as a gift to God. I think that's actually a very valuable thing. So first we have to see the importance of fasting, and now it's the next sections of the chapter is going to be talking about the value of giving charity instead of the fasting, but we'll see, it just gives us that the focus of why the charity is so important, just realizing how important the fasts are. Does that answer?
Yeah, I think so. So the charity is a way to in effect heal the parts of the body that the sin contaminated.
Yeah. And starting from next chapter, the first 3 chapters is more the basics of the Teshuva based on the Alter Rebbe, which is what Teshuva is and what it is not, and where does fasting come in, and that's what we're in the middle of. God willing, starting from chapter 4, it gets into the Kabbalah of Teshuva. So it'll really get into the much deeper part, not about fast or anything else. Chapter 4 starts talking about what it does through our Teshuva on high, what we are accomplishing in God's name through our through our Teshuva. So it's going to put the reason why the Alter Rebbe has to explain fasting so much is because in those days, fasting was something that people were doing, and the people that didn't do it felt that what's the point of Teshuva if I can't fast? So it was almost like a stigma. Either you do it or you don't, but otherwise you're not doing Teshuva. So the Alter Rebbe is explaining the importance of fasting, and then by saying that nowadays we do it through charity. But once we finish this chapter, then it's going to get into the deeper parts of Teshuva. That's a very good question. Maybe as we go along, explain it more. All right, everyone, have a happy Purim. We would love for you to join if you're local. We have a Purim party right here on Sunday at 4 p.m. We'd love to celebrate this awesome day together, and have a happy Purim, everyone. And see you next week. All right, bye, everyone. Bye,
Happy
Michelle. Bye,
Purim.
Steve. Bye, Freda. Bye, Adrian. Bye, Naomi.
Bye.
And bye,